Hello, this is Matt Machuga. The purpose of today's screencast is to build a bundle from start to finish using TDD, or test-driven development. The premise of TDD is that you write a test you know is going to fail, and then you write the smallest amount of code to make that test pass. From there, you can refactor your code. This is known as the red-green refactor cycle. The bundle that we're going to build today is an action filter bundle. Laravel already has its own action filters, but this one is contained within the scope of a controller versus using route filters. This will give us access to the properties and the methods within that controller, and it just allows for some different scoping options. It's something I use in a lot of my applications. It's something I'm comfortable with, and in a recent application I needed this functionality, so I built it. And it serves as a good introduction to TDD because there's no database interaction that we have to worry about, at least not directly. And it's a fairly succinct class. So to get us started, I'm going to create an action filter directory, since that's the name of our bundle, and then cd into it. And something to note is that this is not within our project's directory. This is outside of it, so that we can run git init, and when we create our git directory, it's versioning only this directory. It's not within another project. This is done so we can host this code on GitHub or bundles.laravel.com so we can give it back to the community, and just because it's good practice not to version things inside of other directories. So we're going to run vim readme and markdown. That's just a message that my power line gives, and we're going to write hello world git add readme, and we're going to commit this with a simple commit message initial commit. Oops. Okay, and now that that's saved, we are going to symlink it to our directory. We're going to symlink it into bundles/action filter, which is where this would live if we just plopped it into the bundles directory. So let's cd out, let's go into filter app, and let's launch vim. And if we load nerd tree here, we check out the bundles directory, it's exactly how we left it, and it's right in the place that it should be. So from here we can go ahead and get started with our bundle. I guess since we're testing this with, or making this with TDD, we should create a test folder first. So let's do, let's make test directory. And first and foremost, since it's a bundle, we should create the start file first. So in here, we need to auto load our bundle. And we could use a map, but in our case we're just going to use namespace since I really only have one folder in here. And we're going to load action filter bundle path action filter. Okay, and that's all we need there. So that looks good. Now let's create our first test file. It's going to be filter.test.php, and the test.php convention is something Taylor put into place so that you can have fixture files and helper files in there with .php, but the PHPUnit manifest won't really pick those up. It'll only run the test.php files. So let's create a real simple thing in here, and we're going to go ahead and namespace this right now to action filter, because I like to namespace my bundles. I think it's good practice so there aren't any name collisions. And in our case, there definitely would be a name collision with the Laravel test class, or with the Laravel filter class. So let's name this test action filter. No, we don't need it. We just need test filter. And this is going to extend the PHPUnit framework test case. And actually, I need to go and put the global namespace in there. Okay, so the next thing I do is when I'm in Vim, I like to make my tests map to a key so I don't have to keep typing in the same thing over and over again or cycle through my Vim history. So I always map leader R to run my tests, and leader is the backslash key by default in Vim. Some people map that to comma. I've never had a problem with backslash, so I'm fine with it. So then we're going to map that to bang, PHP, artisan, test, and action filter, because that's the name of our module or bundle. Then we're going to enter a carriage return after, so I don't have to press enter. And if we hit leader R, it runs, nothing happened, that's expected. Essentially, Laravel doesn't know this exists yet. So what we're going to do is edit the application bundles file. We're going to use action filter. And we're going to want this to auto load since I'm going to use it in all my my controllers. So auto equals true, and that's fine. So let's see. Let's pop back in here, and we're going to start the bundle. Okay. Now if we run this, we get an error. We get a failure. And it lets us know that there's no tests found. So let's go ahead and put in our first test. Public function test can create filter. So we're going to use an assertion inside of PHPUnit. We're going to assert that the second parameter is an instance of the first. So we're going to use action filter, and the second parameter is going to be new filter. Now normally this the new filter would cause it to load up Laravel /filter, but because we're inside of the action filter namespace, it will default to our filter. So let's go ahead, save this, see what happens, and we get fatal error. Action filter is not found. That's because we haven't created it yet. So let's go ahead and load that up. Filter.php, split this, PHP class filter, and I do have to namespace this. Okay. Alright, so we have our first passing test. Now what we're going to want to do is somehow we need to get a failing test to start from the next step. So let's go ahead, make public function test must have a callback to instantiate. Actually, this is a little verbose. I don't really like having things like that in there. So let's see. Let's run this. No. Okay, so I think I want this to throw an exception. I wasn't entirely positive I was going to do that, but I think that's a good thing to introduce. So we're going to do expected exception, action filter, and then callback not set exception. That's pretty clear. Alright, the reason you have to do it like this is when you're throwing an exception, it needs a way to detect that exception's happening, and the default exception handler catches it, I think, so this directive tells PHPUnit to look for it. So if I go in here, I do new filter null, or even if I pass in the exact same thing I did above, this is going to fail because there's no exception being thrown. So let's go over to filter, and we're going to write the least amount of code to make this test pass. So let's do public function construct and then callback. Alright, so this won't fail yet, but we'll just run it. And let's do throw new what did I call that? I called it callback not set exception. Okay, and now we're going to get a different error where this one's telling us the class doesn't exist. That's expected. We knew that was going to happen, so let's do callback not set exception extends exception. Okay, now if we save, we get missing one for the constructor, and this is calling it on our first test. So now we have the first test failing, and if we pop this back up here, okay, so now we're getting an exception thrown for our first test. So this is not correct. It's not the right solution. And I mean, that's kind of obvious when you throw an exception as the only code in your constructor. But to give you the right idea, if there's not a callback, we're going to call this code. And we might also add in, we'll just do this for now. Alright, so now our tests pass. We have the right amount of code in there to, it'll instantiate. It doesn't do anything with callback yet, but we'll get there. If we do this, and we already know this is working from the test above, but if I were to change this to test, this test is going to fail because we're not throwing the exceptions. So we know it's the right test. We're testing the correct thing. Alright, I think that's a good stopping point for now. I don't want to get too far in any further, and we're not going to hit a really good stopping point. So let's go ahead and drop back to the shell, and let's do, I'm going to go back to action filter. So we're going to get status on it. You can see that we have our files here that we've added. And we're going to go ahead and add all of these. We know we need them all under version control, so it's okay. And we'll do git commit and say add filter class test and start file. Alright, so we have our first commit, well, second commit, first one with actual content, and I mean really everything's ready to go. So next time we're going to cover writing more tests, more in-depth tests. We're going to finish out the filter class, and then I'm hoping to get everything crammed in so that we can work on putting this into a real controller. If not, we can split it out into another screencast. It's not a problem. But hopefully this was a good introduction to TDD for you, or at least an introduction in the PHP or Laravel world. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next screencast.